I'm your host Helen Douthwaite Teasdale, and welcome to Brass Evolution, a show where we explore the rich culture and history of the brass banding world. This episode I chat to Besses researcher Steve Hughes about the band performing to princes and presidents on their groundbreaking French tour of 1905. Welcome to the podcast, Steve. Could you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and the research that you do?
I'm getting on in years now. I'm now 60, and I learned to play in bands in the 1970s. Anyway, I gave up for about 25 years, returned in the early 2000s, and I live just near Besses of the Barn Band. I knew of it from the days when I played. So I joined as a player, been there ever since, and I've been doing the research or acting as the archivist for the band, with its researching, following on from other research that's been done by other people several times in the past, making corrections, updating it, enhancing it with, the access that I have that people didn't have in the past, such as the internet, prime example.
Just to say as well to all the listeners, Steve has really got a massive archive of research. Like, it goes into super detail. So basically, thanks to Steve, we've got all this information and a lot of the information that we're going to talk about today as well. Today, we're going to be talking about Besses' 1905 tour of France. But before we get into them setting across the channel, could you give us a little bit of a background about Besses on the run up to that period and before they went on this tour?
The start of Besses, the band was formed in early 19th century in 1818. It was then a brass and reed band called Clegs, but eventually, as it grew, and it had stumbling starts. It started from just a few people getting together to play music. It grew and it became all brass in the 1850s, which I think is quite similar to even all the older bands at the time, that they weren't all brass until 1850s. It then enjoyed some success until it had its first failure with a breakup of the band, everybody leaving bar 4 people in 1870. Then they grew from strength to strength, and in the 1880s or 1883, 84, that was where things really started to change when they employed Alexander Owen, their professional conductor and trainer, and from then on they just seemed to win everything contest wise, and they made a lot of money out of a lot of things seemed to combine at one time. Joining of Alexander Owen, breakup of a nearby band, which meant that there was an influx of about 10 experienced players. Because of the success of the band, they were widely reported throughout the press, or the brass band press, which was the Brass Band News, and then later the British Bandsman. And they had a stalwart supporter, become very well known as within the brass band presses. He contributed articles, and he was constantly banging on and on, and wherever you looked, it was Besses. So it's very important to have somebody like that. Other bands did, and they'd argue, like pundits, like football pundits would do. You get your Manchester United pundit and your Liverpool pundit. They really raised the profile of the band. There was people that were in the band, were so in love with the band. There was one that wrote a book, and there was no book written biography of the band, which is one of the earliest ever recorded documents of that kind. They also bought their own premises, and they did something that formed themselves into a limited company, which meant that all the members of the band could share in the profits of the band, which was quite another unique thing that Besses did. Anyway, this all led to the early 20th century, when they won their one and only what we know as the British National Championships. This was at Crystal Palace, and from that point on, they decided to pull out of contesting and start making money from touring. Maybe they saw the writing on the wall while the money was in. And I want to say long touring. I'm talking at 8 months at a time, and then it became world tours, 18 months at a time, recording and marketing the band with money making ideas, and capitalizing on the fame that they gained up to that point. That point is where we're sort of starting today's story, which is the first main tour, which was the known as the Entente Cordial tour of 1905.
It just seems like everything just sort of has accumulated, come together, and then we're at this 1905 point where everything seems to sort of
Yeah,
blossom, explode for the band, really.
yeah, it's a tipping point. It was a tipping point. It was a change in focus from contesting, pulled out of contesting, and we're concentrating purely on making money elsewhere.
Can I just ask a quick question, Steve? So, in terms of the players, would they be classed as professional musicians? Did they have day jobs? Because assuming that they were going on tours for something like, 12 months, 18 months, surely they couldn't possibly have employment in the UK, for example. So
No.
were they all paid musicians through the Besses organisation?
I've never found a contract yet, but I've seen references to them. Every player would have a contract, which would basically cover them for loss of earnings whilst away, whilst on tour. However, I do believe that the greater part of the monies that may have received came from the distribution and a share in the profits ensuing from the tours. So they were covered for, and I do believe that the money, even the basic money that they got, it was more than you could get, in those days as a manual labourer or a working man. And most of the members of Besses players were working men from the mills and factories, industrial Manchester and Lancashire.
Could you tell us how this tour came about? Because it seems like a little bit of a sort of a first for the band. Was it a first for UK bands generally, do you think?
I think so. It all started in the year before 1904, and it was pushed as part of the Entente Cordiale, which was an attempt to strengthen Anglo-French relations, which was also not just out of wanting to be great friends with them, but it had a lot of political and business reasons in bringing them together for trade. For example, selling stuff to France, and France getting access to our markets. A precursor to what we've been doing recently got out of with Brexit. And in fact, the term Entente Cordiale has been used recently because of us leaving Europe. King Charles has mentioned and started using the phrase again because we've left. It's important that we stay with firm links with the likes of especially France now that we're not part of the European Union. It was a Lancashire committee, so businessmen, politicians decided that they wanted to sponsor a band to tour France with the proceeds of all the concerts to be given over to French charities. And eventually, they decided that Besses would be the only choice of band to do this. That's how the idea started, and eventually more and more people bought into it. Besses had to buy into it, and then the organisation of the whole thing, people had to be brought in to manage it. Yeah, so there was the Besses people. Then you've got people like the British bandsmen were involved, national papers were involved, the Daily Mail, I think it was, the Manchester Guardian, on the Manchester Evening News that we have now. They sent reporters and photographers on the tour, and there was a fundraising throughout the Lancashire to sponsor the tour, to fund it.
Was there anyone from Besses in particular that was sort of spearheading the Besses involvement?
Well, there's John Henry Isles. He was the guy that owned the Crystal Palace contest, also owned the British Open at Bellevue. Big entrepreneur. He also owned the British Bandsman, and he was heavily involved in money-making activities within banding. He became the band manager at that point for touring. And there was a guy called William Bogle within Bessie's band who was the secretary and probably did the majority of all the work and all the paperwork.
When we just talk about how the tour kicked off, let's talk about the Royal Command performance.
Yeah, I think it was only a week or so before the tour started that a telegram, not a letter, a telegram was received from the palace with an invitation from the king, which King Edward VII for Besses. He'd heard all about the tour, and he was a big supporter of the Entente Cordial. He invited them to play at Windsor at a garden party for the 11th birthday of his grandson, Edward, Prince of Wales, which was a cricket match. Besses were to come down and play a cricket match to celebrate his birthday at this garden party. And the interesting thing is that the party was the King Edward, his son, who later became King George V, and his two grandsons, which was, as I say, Prince Edward, and also Prince Albert, who were captain of each of the teams. So there's four kings in one.
Did someone commission the band to play? Was there a particular individual who requested the band play at this
whether
event?
they got paid for this, I don't know, but he immediately said yes, and it happened very coincidentally. On the Friday, the day before Besses were due to leave for France, so basically they stopped off in Windsor, played the concert, spoke to the king, and met all the royals, and then set off for Paris. They got there on the train, and then went down to Dover to get on the ferry or some sort of boat to Calais.
It's just extraordinary, really, when you think about it. I think it's like it's a little insight, because it is actually sort of a private performance in a sense. It's not.
Yeah, it was
open to the public.
Affair. There's only the press there that were with Besses. It wasn't something that was. It was a totally intimate. It was described as an intimate affair. But when you think about it, Besses then went on to Paris, and within a day or so, they were playing to the president of France. I think it was called. I've got his name somewhere, but I think it was Loubert. So, for playing for the king and queen, and 24 hours playing for the president of France, it doesn't get much better than that, does it?
From one country to the other, 24 hours to royal, to, performance of national importance, really.
And basically, the band toured from the, that was the day that they did, when we were at Windsor was the 23rd of June. They toured France. It started in Paris in the next day, the 24th, and it was only a 10-day or so tour, which took in Paris, Marseille, Dieppe, Lyon, and then back to England, where the band continued touring all around England for the next couple of months, until they played as the guest band, or the headline band the celebrations at the end of the British Nationals British National competition at Crystal Palace at the end of September. Then they did a couple more months as they worked their way back to Manchester, and then they had a couple of days off for Christmas.
As you do.
Yeah.
It seems like quite a sort of packed schedule, like lots of concerts, lots of events.
There was lots of concerts. There'd be matinees, be evening concerts, there'd be impromptu concerts, and there was a lot of meals. Where Besses were the guests, but they were also the entertainment. There was lots of high-profile dignitaries everywhere. All consular people from the British government and the French government, or the French charities, and as I say, even the French president.
Could we just talk a little bit about the band's? We're going to say concert, but maybe we can expand on it a little bit for the president, because I think it was more of an impromptu situation. Could you just describe it for us a little bit?
One of the people, when they arrived in Paris, that met them and hosted them was Martha Besson. Now, everybody should recognise Besson, that became Boozy and Art, Boozy and Art. And the band were hosted by her. At some of the meals, one of the meals, they were invited to go and play an event in Paris that the president was attending. But it turned out that there was no way they were going to get to play in front of the president. But then there was a general sort of march of all the various bands and people that were there. And Besses managed to sneak in and get down to the front, and ended up playing the Marseille. The French sort of national anthem in front of the president, who then spoke to them, realised who they were, and invited them the next day to his residence, and to meet him.
Now, like a brass band sort of pushing their way to the front there.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what they did, because they had to circumvent all the police and all the security. So they had people that the fans and supporters that were with them, lumping stands around, the instruments and the music and what have you, and then they all sort of like sneak one by one through different means and to all meet up just at the right place to suddenly strike up with a Marseille.
We all know the best way to get into a concert for free is to carry stands and equipment
Yeah,
if you're not playing.
Right, yeah.
So
Yeah,
I'm glad to see that that's still taking place,
yeah.
nowadays. Do we know how many people were roughly attending these kinds of events and concerts in France?
According to the press, and I take a lot with a pinch of salt. Later that afternoon in Paris is recorded of something like 10, 20,000 people, but I'm not really sure how that many people could hear a brass band at the same time. Perhaps maybe that was the number of people that had past the band as they were playing, but it wasn't a fixed audience. We were playing in the Tuileries Gardens. It is a sort of I don't know, is it like Central Park in New York, or what's that, Regent Park in London that we have? Again, places for people to play and have relaxation.
You spoke a little bit at the beginning about that there was sort of a press contingent with the band. Could you give us a little bit of an idea about what they were reporting and what they were sending back to the UK?
Well, the British bandsmen were leading this. As I say, John Henry Howells was with the band, and he made sure he was alongside Alexander Owen, the band's conductor. He was recognised, and he was making speeches at the various meals and at concerts and things. And as he owned the British bandsman, his editor Sam Cope, people should know of. He was the editor of the bandsman, and he was ensuring that reports were going daily back to the UK. Which were then, I don't know whether they had news feeds in them days or whatever, but then passed on to other, reproduced in other newspapers all throughout. They'd sort of buy the rights to that, and these included photographs of the band, and as I say, very detailed daily reports of what they've been up to.
I mean, imagine sending a report every day from your brass band concert. It's wild, isn't it? We just can't imagine that sort of thing. I mean, obviously, nowadays, like social media, press of a button, we would have information about every concert, but they must have to been like following them absolutely everywhere, which is, it's just crazy, isn't it, really?
Well, the British bandman produced a special edition which compiled everything together of the whole tour with the pictures and the conversations, for example, between the King and band members and Alexander Owen, speeches that were made, and it's something like a 20-page edition. But as I say, all this was being compiled every day and produced. The daily reports were put through Daily Mail.
Can we just talk about the makeup of the band a little bit? Do we know roughly how many players were on the tour and the kind of entourage that were with them?
A standard band, the MD Alexander Owen, the solo euphonium and bandmaster. And I mentioned him. It's Fred Berry. The reason I mention him is that what once all the day-to-day work of concerts conducting needed to be done. Alexander Owen wasn't there; it was Fred Berry who did it all. But if it was the King, was playing to the King or the French president or anything important, then Alexander made sure he was, or the band made sure that Alexander was the conductor, and it was just a standard band. Besses made up. As what we'd recognise a band now. Your three trombones, four basses. 25 players plus percussion.
Oh, there was percussion as well. That's amazing.
There was, yeah, there certainly was. There was tune percussion. It was mainly, it wasn't kit. as we know it. But the bass drum, cymbals, glockenspiel, xylophone, and timpani. But the ones that you had to tune while you were playing them, the old little kettle drums. Yeah.
That's really interesting. That adds like another layer of logistics. Do you know what I
Well,
mean? To get all these
certainly.
instruments and get all these
Yeah.
sort of percussion instruments
Well,
around
it amazed,
France.
yeah. Well, it amazed me. Well, it's not just around France. It's around when they went around the world and what have you, and mainly using trains. How did they book a carriage? Where did they put them all? Plus their own luggage. But maybe in them days people didn't carry big suitcases of 20 shirts and 10 pairs of trousers and all the rest of it. Because all you had to do was change your collar, didn't you?
I
To find
know.
a
I've got
certain colour.
images of like a xylophone in the middle aisle of the train, it's
Yeah,
like all this
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
mean, the stories of the players, especially when they were doing the world tours later, having to, doing much of the catching much of the sleep up, on train journeys, and certainly this is mentioned whilst we were in France. They needed because I think they were doing a lot of socializing while they were there. Which I can imagine, I don't think they were all teetotal. So I imagine, they needed to catch up on a bit of sleep and freshen up between late night meals and then getting up in the morning to travel across the country. It's a pretty big place, France, I think.
yeah, I was going to say, I think, if you're coming from sort of working and living in the UK to then be all of a sudden playing for royalty, playing for the president, doing all these tours and events, you're going to be absolutely wanting to live as, and
Well, of course
see
you
and
are, yeah.
play
Yeah,
and eat and drink as much as, just enjoy
yeah.
the full experience, really, aren't you?
And it's not just that that you were meeting because there was a lot of emigration and you meeting people or people from your own town. Like there's one story of when they were I think they were in Paris and they heard some sort of female voice shout, "Hey up, duckins, how's thee?" And oh well, maybe not. That's from Stoke, but I can't remember what. But anyway, it was women from Bury that started chatting with them. That had relocated to Paris. I'm not really sure what it was meant, but they called them ladies, but don't know what they were doing there.
Let's just call them band supporters for the moment,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. Well, it was inferred in the,
Yeah.
they were
I mean,
working
do you not
ladies.
always find that when you go on holiday, you're sitting by the pool and then you hear that accent and
Yes,
somebody from
yeah.
like, down the street?
Yeah, well, I'm from Salford. Don't forget that Besses it was Lancashire then, and there was no Greater Manchester and what have you. But yeah, I don't speak Lancashire, but I can imagine. I don't have that Lancashire dialect, but yes, exactly. And people tend to we call them expats now, don't we? And in them days, you'd find that they create a Lancashire society wherever, and a Yorkshire society, just so they could, keep one foot back in the homeland, if you like, by living and socializing with people, from where they came from themselves.
Absolutely. I think, if you found out that a band from the town that you're from or the area that you're from is
Yeah,
literally in Paris and you're,
yeah, yeah,
I think you would definitely make an effort to go and, see
yeah.
what was happening,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, the French were very interested in the band though, and there've been lots of efforts by the UK to get some interest in what we did. But well, if we tried to go over apparently with football, they weren't really interested, and any of the other things that cricket, for example. Well, but music is an international language, isn't it? And they wanted to see what we were all up to, and nowadays. And I'm not saying it was anything to do with Besses, but it's quite a thriving banding community in France. But back then they won't have been. They'll have been It'll have been totally new to them, I think.
Yeah, there's that sort of something new, something exciting, something we've maybe not seen
Yeah,
before, ensembles, music that we haven't seen before. So yeah, that I think at the time, you'd want to go and see what that was all about, wouldn't you?
but
Definitely with
I
this
mean,
sort of
banding is
relation.
yeah, brass band is quintessentially British. Um, but as I say, but it's music, so people. would be interested because it was music and they'd be curious. Whereas things like other things that are quintessentially English, like as I say, cricket, have no interest whatsoever. They're not going to get anybody over, interested, in that.
Can we just talk a little bit about when they came back to the UK, that French tour set them up really well for future tours. Could you just give us a little bit of a sort of flavour of the kind of tours that they went on after this French one?
I believe whilst they were over in France, they began talking because the French wanted them back regularly. People in France were saying that was brilliant, get them back, get them back. They did, they set the sights higher, or via the determination of ambition, sorry, of John Henry Iles, and the next major tour, which started a year later. In the summer of 1906, was a world tour. But when I say world tour, the world, as far as Britain was concerned, then there was a Commonwealth, really, wasn't it? So it was a tour which lasted 18 months. So it began with North America and Canada. The band moved over to get to New Zealand, but they passed through and stayed in the Fiji Islands and on Honolulu. Finally getting to New Zealand early 1907. They did 4 or 5 months in New Zealand, 6 months in Australia, then back home on the ship.
It's just incredible, isn't it? Really, when you think about it.
Yeah, they got home just I think it's not Christmas Day, but Boxing Day, 28th of December.
It's just wild to think that people were that they were touring the world with all the equipment, all the gear, all the entourage. It's amazing. It's a really amazing.
That was just the first one. The next one was the same length of time roughly, but instead of America, this one it started in South Africa. Then it was New Zealand, Australia, then back to South Africa and home. Started in 1909 and we were back in 1911. And then I won't go into the details of what happened in the second tour, but it was a big fallout with John Henry Iles, and it was a tour that could have been a disaster with them band short of money, and so they came back to the UK and spent the next couple of years working their butts off to earn money to cover any losses and the money they'd lost, but on the tour. But then in 1912 they did a tour to one of the national exhibitions, which was in Canada. I think it was 3 months, 3 or 4 months that they toured Canada. But then there was more tours planned, but the war got in the way.
Steve, could you just give us an idea of how important you think Besses is to the sort of history of the brass band movement?
I'm not saying Besses is the oldest band, has got the most successful band, the only band that's ever done any major tours or world tours. The only band that's ever recorded, even like the early recordings, they've done it, but lots of other bands have done it. Many things that Besses have done, that all bands have done, but Besses has done them all. So you've got in one band, if you want to get encapsulate all the various markers throughout the last 200 years or so that any band could have got involved in, Besses was there and did it. From, as I say, from competitions, from Besses is not the only ones that have played before the King and Queen. There's other Royal Command performances. Besses haven't won the most British Opens or they've not got a massive record of contest wins, but they've done everything. And also they're not a band that everybody may think that I was going on about Besses this, Besses that, but Besses have been at the absolute bottom, as far down as you can go in fortunes, from being down to, and it just happened several times, but then they've rose back to the top. So the history of Besses isn't all about success; it's also about failure, and the ability to get back again to where you previously were, and that's the important thing. Throughout its history, contact with other bands and bandsmen is immense. So the story of Besses includes stories in for many other bands. The top bands such as Dyke, the competition that there was between the two, and the rivalry between the two bands in the 1800s. You couldn't choose between them. They were the Man United and Liverpool of the time. Or maybe I should say Leeds.
Of course. Steve, thank you so much. That's been absolutely fascinating. It's really interesting to see like these pictures of tours, and especially so early on in the 20th century, the logistics and the types of people involved. It's really interesting. Steve, where can people find out more about your research into Besses?
Well, if you use YouTube, there's a History of Besses channel. There's a Besses channel where I use recordings of Besses back from way back, the early ones from 1904 through to the present day, but more older recordings of historical interest. I use that to do a bit of education on the Besses history by each piece, trying to set it in historical context. And now, so that may be of interest. There's there's the Besses www.besses.co.uk. You can access this on there, and then you can email through that, or you can go on the Facebook group, there's a History of Besses Facebook group, and you can contact me through that. And I will be putting all this that we talked to, because I know there's a lot, and I've jumped about from one thing to another. I can include all the pictures, what I've told you today in more detail for anybody interested. And if you're not, well,
thank you, Steve, so much for a really interesting chat about the Entente Cordial tour, and I'll put links to everything that Steve's talking about today. So thank you. If you like the podcast, please help it to grow by liking, sharing, rating and reviewing. You can also support the podcast by leaving a tip or buying a perk, including asking my next guest a question or getting a shout out via fan list. Link in the show notes. Podcast music is Mephistopheles, performed by the Illinois Brass Band.